The millionaire's autistic son hadn't eaten for 5 days. Until the poor maid acted for 5 days, the child refused to eat, ignored by a household obsessed with image and perfection. It was the new maid, with no degree and no followers, who broke the rules and did the unthinkable. The boy reacted, and that alone was enough for her to be cancelled online by those desperate to protect the facade. But what seemed like an isolated scandal exposed far darker truths: hidden paternity, negligence and manipulation in the name of fame. In the most luxurious penthouse in Kensington, London, the view of Hyde Park served merely as a backdrop for Beatrice Montgomery's perfect photos. At 32, she had built a digital empire with over 5 million followers, selling the image of an exemplary mother and devoted wife. Her posts on conscious motherhood landed her multi-million-pound contracts with children's product and cosmetic brands. On that sunny April morning, while adjusting the lighting for another sponsored video, Beatrice ignored the faint sounds coming from the next room. Her son Leo, 4 years old, had been lying in bed for days, growing weaker and weaker. The pediatrician had been replaced 3 times in the last few weeks. No diagnosis seemed to satisfy what Beatrice wanted to hear. "I can't have a child with problems," she whispered to herself as she applied her signature matte pink lipstick. "It doesn't fit my personal brand." On the other side of the 300-square-meter apartment, Mark Montgomery, an executive at a multinational corporation and Beatrice's husband, watched his son in silence. At 45, he felt increasingly absent, trapped in a routine that oscillated between long hours at the office and a home that felt more like a permanent photo studio. "Leo needs professional help," he ventured, knowing he would be ignored. "He needs to stop throwing tantrums," Beatrice replied curtly, without looking away from the mirror. "If this continues, I'll have to postpone the children's collection campaign. Do you have any idea how much that will cost me in engagement?" That same day, Teresa O'Connell came up in the service elevator, carrying a small backpack with her documents and a change of clothes. At 38, a single mother of 2 teenagers, she had never worked as a housekeeper before. With a degree in education, she hadn't been able to find a job in her field since the small school where she worked had closed during the pandemic. The opportunity at the Montgomerys' home had come through an employment agency. They urgently needed someone to take care of the house and, most importantly, the sick boy. "He hasn't eaten in 3 days, Beatrice's assistant, a young woman with platinum blonde hair who didn't look up from her phone, explained quickly. "The missus will give you the list of permitted and forbidden foods. Don't deviate a millimeter from what's written." Teresa felt a chill as she entered Leo's room. The space, though impeccably decorated in shades of blue and white, felt cold and sterile. Not a toy out of place, no drawings on the walls, no sign of childhood life beyond the small body huddled under the Egyptian cotton sheets. "Hi, Leo," she said softly, approaching the bed. "My name is Teresa." The boy's eyes, dull and distant, barely moved in her direction. Teresa immediately noticed the signs: the rhythmic hand flapping, the lack of eye contact, the hypersensitivity when she accidentally bumped the door. In her years in education, she had worked with neurodivergent children. She recognized the traits of the autism spectrum. While organizing her things in the small maid's room, Teresa heard Beatrice's shrill voice coming from the living room. "He needs to be presentable by Friday. We have the photo shoot for Homes and Gardens magazine, modern family theme. Understand? I can't have a son who looks sick." Teresa took a deep breath. In her bag, she kept a photo of her children, Matthew and Louisa, who were now home alone after school. The salary offered by the Montgomerys was 3 times higher than any other opportunity she had found in recent months. She couldn't afford to lose this job, but something about this house deeply unsettled her. That night, while Beatrice recorded stories about maternal self-care in her walk-in closet and Mark worked late in his home office, Teresa quietly entered Leo's room. The boy remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. In the minimalist kitchen, where state-of-the-art appliances shared space with hermetically sealed jars of organic food, Teresa found a detailed list taped to the refrigerator. Forbidden: sugar, gluten, dairy, artificial colors, preservatives, processed foods, red meat, foods cooked above 40 degrees Celsius. Teresa frowned. The diet seemed more like a fashion trend than a medical recommendation. In Nake, her experience with children on the spectrum, she knew many had food selectivity. Textures, colors, and the presentation of food could be crucial. Ignoring the list, she prepared a simple plate of rice, beans, and an egg, real food, as her grandmother used to say. She added a spoonful of butter, cut the egg into a flower shape, and arranged everything playfully. It was a risk, but something told her the boy wasn't eating, not because he was sick, but because he was being forced into a diet incompatible with his sensory needs. She returned to the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "Leo, look what I brought. It looks like a little flower, doesn't it?" For the first time, the boy's eyes focused on something, the colorful plate in front of him. With hesitant movements, Leo reached out and touched the egg. Then, to Teresa's surprise, he put a piece in his mouth, and another, and another. Teresa held back tears. As the boy ate, she could see the color slowly returning to his pale cheeks. She also noticed the marks of monitoring stickers on his thin arms, remnants of hospital visits that seemed to have yielded no proper diagnosis. From the hallway, Mark watched the scene, paralyzed. It was the first time in weeks he had seen his son react to anything. A mixture of relief and guilt washed over him. How had he let things get to this point? "What are you doing?" he asked in a low voice, approaching. Teresa froze, expecting a reprimand. "I'm sorry, I thought he might like it." To her surprise, Mark knelt beside the bed, his eyes welling up. "He's eating. My God, he's eating." At that moment, Beatrice's phone rang in the next room. Her artificial voice echoed through the apartment's corridors. "Hi, my loves, I'm here to show you my nightly skincare routine. You all asked for it." Mark and Teresa exchanged a look of silent understanding. Something had to change in this house, and fast. Leo finished eating, and for the first time in days made a sound. Not a word, but a small murmur of satisfaction. To Teresa, that was worth more than any digital applause Beatrice could ever receive on her social media. What none of them knew was that this simple plate of food would trigger a series of events that would forever change the Montgomery family's life and expose the deep cracks behind the perfect facade Beatrice fought so hard to maintain. The next morning, Beatrice entered Leo's room holding a tray with a green smoothie and activated seeds. "What is this on his plate?" she demanded, pointing to the remnants of the previous night's meal. Her eyes, always perfectly lined even in the early morning, narrowed at Teresa. "He ate," answered Mark, who had slept in the armchair next to his son's bed. For the first time in days, he ate real food. Beatrice placed the tray on the nightstand with a sharp movement, spilling the green liquid. "There's a list on the fridge. It's not a suggestion, it's an order. Leo has severe intolerances, and you," she turned to Teresa, "could be compromising his entire treatment." Teresa stood firm, years of experience with children giving her confidence. "Mrs. Montgomery, with all due respect, I've noticed that Leo shows clear signs of atypical sensory processing. The texture and temperature of food can be crucial for him." "And since when are you a doctor?" Beatrice retorted, adjusting her silk robe for a discreet photo she would take later, captioned, "Challenging mornings of a real mom." Or better. "Yet who gave you permission to diagnose my son?" Mark tried to intervene. "B, the important thing is that he ate. He's responding." "Don't call me that in front of the staff," Beatrice snapped. B was her childhood nickname, a remnant of the girl from the home counties who had come to the capital seeking a different life, long before her social media fame. At that moment, Leo made a sound and pointed to the empty plate. His eyes, once dull, now sought Teresa's. "See?" Teresa said softly. "He's communicating." Beatrice grabbed her phone and began typing furiously. "I'm calling. Dr. Leonard right now. He'll explain the importance of the detox diet. In the meantime," she looked coldly at Teresa, "you will clean this room and prepare the clothes for the photo shoot, and remember the list on the fridge." As soon as Beatrice left, Mark ran a hand through his graying hair. "I'm sorry about that. She's under a lot of pressure." Teresa noticed the weariness in the man's eyes, as if he were carrying an invisible weight. "Mr. Montgomery, your son needs a professional evaluation. These behaviors, the food selectivity, they are consistent with the autism spectrum." "Autism?" Mark seemed genuinely surprised. But the pediatrician never mentioned— "How many pediatricians have you consulted?" Teresa asked. "4 in the last 2 months, he admitted. Beatrice is never satisfied with the diagnoses. Over the week, Teresa established a routine with Leo. She kept the bedroom door at the same angle, spoke in a soft tone, and respected when he didn't want physical contact. During meals, she found moments to introduce simple, nutritious foods when Beatrice was busy with her live streams or meetings with sponsoring brands. Leo began to show subtle progress. He maintained eye contact for longer, accepted more varieties of food, and even rehearsed some sounds that resembled words. Teresa documented everything in a small notebook hidden in her room. On Thursday, while Beatrice was having her Pilates class on the terrace, Teresa found Mark in his office. "Mr. Montgomery, look at this," she said, showing him her observation log. "Leo is responding to routine, to predictability. These are typical characteristics of children on the spectrum." Mark studied the meticulous notes. "You really understand this, don't you?" "I worked for 5 years in inclusive education," she explained. "Many of the children who displayed behaviors like Leo's flourished with the right intervention." Mark sighed deeply. "Beatrice won't accept this. For her, having an autistic son would be incompatible with the image she's built." "But what about for you?" Teresa questioned. The question hung in the air, interrupted by the sound of heels on the marble hallway. "What are you two whispering about?" Beatrice asked, an alkaline water bottle in one hand and her phone in the other. "Mark, Dr. Leonard is coming to evaluate Leo. It seems he's had a relapse because of that inappropriate food." Teresa's heart sank. "A relapse? He's eating, interacting. Don't confuse response with recovery," Beatrice cut in. "Dr. Leonard is an expert in functional nutrition for sensitive children. He'll explain why your homespun approach is harming Leo." When the doctor arrived, Teresa was instructed to stay in the kitchen. Through the ajar door, she could hear Beatrice controlling the narrative. "Doctor, we hired this woman recently, but she's been introducing foods outside the protocol. Leo seems more agitated. Look at these spasms in his hands." Teresa recognized what Beatrice called spasms. They were self-regulatory behaviors, or stimming common in autistic children. They weren't symptoms of worsening, but natural expressions of Leo's neurodivergence. The doctor, a man with a soft voice and designer glasses, nodded at every word from Beatrice. Teresa noticed he barely examined Leo, preferring to agree with the influencer mother's observations. "We'll adjust the diet, completely eliminate animal proteins, and increase antioxidant supplements," the doctor concluded, prescribing an even more restrictive regimen. That night, Teresa found Leo crying silently in his room. The tray of green soup and flaxseed crackers remained untouched. "Hey, little one," she whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You're hungry, aren't you?" Leo looked at her with pleading eyes. Teresa knew she was risking her job, but she couldn't ignore the boy's suffering. She waited until Beatrice was busy with her nightly skincare live stream, and Mark was tied up in a virtual meeting to fetch ingredients from the kitchen for a simple oatmeal with banana. Leo ate everything, his small fingers holding the spoon with difficulty but with determination. When he finished, he rested his head on Teresa's arm, the first physical contact he had initiated voluntarily. "Tété," he murmured, in an attempt to say her name. Tears streamed down Teresa's face. It was more than a thank you for food. It was an acknowledgement of trust, of connection. From the doorway, Mark watched the scene, a hand covering his mouth to stifle his emotion. For the first time in years, he saw his son trying to communicate, building a bridge to the outside world. What none of them noticed was the discreet flash of a phone. Standing in the hallway, partially hidden by the shadows, Beatrice captured the scene, not with the eyes of an emotional mother, but with the calculation of someone who saw a threat to her carefully constructed narrative. That same night, while everyone slept, Beatrice edited the image on her iPad. With a few taps, she transformed the healthy oatmeal into something unrecognizable, added a filter that made Leo look more gaunt, and wrote a long caption about employees who disrespect medical orders and mothers who must be vigilant. The post was not published immediately. Beatrice was too strategic to act on impulse. That photo would be her weapon, saved for the right moment. Meanwhile, in her small staff room, Teresa wasn't sleeping either. She was writing in her notebook, detailing observations about Leo's behaviors, referencing studies on autism, and listing specialists who could properly evaluate the boy. Deep down, she knew she was treading on dangerous ground, challenging not only the house rules, but the entire artificial universe Beatrice had created. What Teresa didn't imagine was how much her life would change in the next 48 hours, and how the Montgomery's perfect facade would begin to crumble, revealing secrets much deeper than restrictive diets and avoided diagnoses. On Friday, the Montgomery's apartment was transformed into a photo studio. Lighting, makeup, and production professionals moved through the impeccably decorated rooms. The shoot for Homes and Gardens magazine was to be the highlight of Beatrice's week. "I want the theme to be natural and elegant in the modern home," she explained to the team as a makeup artist applied blush to her cheekbones. "Leo will wear the navy blue outfit from Petit Chéri, the one from the last campaign." Teresa helped Leo get dressed, noticing his discomfort with the starched fabric of the shirt. She knew that children with sensory sensitivities often preferred soft clothes without prominent seams or tags. "It's tight, isn't it?" she whispered, discreetly loosening the collar. "Let's just try to look handsome for a little while, and then you can wear your comfy clothes, I promise." Leo looked at her with trust. In just 1 week, they had established a connection no one else had managed before. The photo shoot began in the main living room, with Beatrice strategically positioned on the light-colored sofa, holding a teacup. Mark, in his impeccable suit, was to stand beside her. Leo was supposed to sit on the plush rug, playing with organic wooden blocks. "Bring Leo in," the photographer commanded. When Teresa entered with the boy, Beatrice almost dropped her cup. "What happened to his hair?" "He was very uncomfortable with the gel," Teresa explained. "He was scratching his head until it hurt." "You don't understand anything," Beatrice hissed. "Discomfort is temporary, the image is permanent." Nevertheless, the shoot proceeded. To everyone's surprise, Leo remained calm next to Teresa, who stayed out of the photos, but always within the boy's line of sight, offering him security. "Now I want a shot of just the family," the photographer announced. "Mom, Dad, and son on the white sofa." When Teresa moved away, Leo began to flap his hands frantically, his way of expressing anxiety. Seconds later, a sharp scream cut through the silence of the makeshift studio. "He's having a fit!" Beatrice exclaimed, jumping up so as not to be hit by the glass of water Leo had knocked over. "It's not a fit," Teresa corrected, approaching quickly. "It's sensory overload. Too much light, noise, people. Enough!" Beatrice grabbed Leo's arm forcefully, dragging him to his room. "You're ruining everything." Mark, who had been watching, paralyzed, finally reacted. "Beatrice, stop it." Inside the room, Beatrice confronted Teresa. "What have you done to him? He was never like this before." "He was always like this," Teresa answered firmly. "He just wasn't allowed to show it." "You're fired!" Beatrice declared, her face contorted with rage. "Get your things and leave now." Mark entered the room just in time to hear the sentence. "Beatrice, be reasonable." "Reasonable? Did you see what happened out there? Months of negotiation with the magazine, potential contracts, all ruined." "And our son?" Mark questioned, with a firmness that surprised everyone, including himself. "Do you care about him or just what he represents for your personal brand?" At that moment, Beatrice's phone buzzed. It was a notification from the magazine, cancelling the feature. The reason? Concerns about the child's well-being during the shoot. "See what you've caused?" Beatrice accused, pointing at Teresa. "Get out of my house, now." With a heavy heart, Teresa packed her few belongings. Before leaving, she managed a moment alone with Leo. "Remember, little one," she whispered, holding his small hands. "You are perfect, just the way you are." On her way out, Mark approached her discreetly. "I'm so sorry for all of this. You were right about Leo, I know that now." Teresa handed him her notebook of observations. "Get him professional help. He's not sick. He just needs to be understood in his difference. The next day, as Teresa desperately searched for another job to support her children, her phone wouldn't stop, ringing. Hate messages, threats, and accusations of child neglect flooded her social media and email. Beatrice had published the edited photo with a long narrative about how Teresa had ignored vital medical restrictions and put Leo at risk. Hashtags like Norwegia Moms Against Child Abuse and Justice for Leo spread rapidly. Beatrice's millions of followers turned into a digital army against Teresa. "Mum, what's happening?" asked Louisa, Teresa's 15-year-old daughter, showing her horrible comments on her own social media profile. "They're saying you hurt a child." Teresa hugged her daughter, trying to hold back tears. "It's a lie, honey. I would never do that." Her son, Matthew, 17, entered the room holding his phone. "People are finding our address, Mum. I'm scared." Teresa knew she had to act fast. With trembling hands, she called the only lawyer she knew, a friend from university who now worked in digital law. "Robert, I need urgent help. I'm being subjected to online defamation." Across the city, in the luxurious Kensington apartment, the situation was also deteriorating rapidly. Leo had stopped eating completely after Teresa's departure. He refused even liquids, curled up in a fetal position in his bed. "He needs to go to the hospital," Mark insisted after 24 hours of his son's fast. Beatrice, busy responding to the wave of online support she was receiving, hesitated. "They'll ask questions. The press will find out." "So what?" Mark exploded. "Our son is wasting away. That's more important than your damn public image?" At the most exclusive private hospital in London, the Lister, Leo was immediately admitted. The preliminary diagnosis: moderate malnutrition and dehydration. The doctors on duty, intrigued by the case, requested the boy's complete dietary history. "He was on a special diet," Beatrice explained vaguely. "What kind of diet?" questioned the pediatrician, Dr. Caroline Matthews, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes behind red-framed glasses. "Too restrictive," Mark intervened, to Beatrice's surprise. "No protein, limited carbohydrates, zero sugar." The doctor frowned. Who prescribed this regimen for a developing child? Beatrice's silence was her answer. Dr. Matthews continued her evaluation, noting Leo's repetitive behaviors, his difficulty with social interaction, his sensory hypersensitivity. "Have you ever considered an evaluation for autism spectrum disorder?" she asked directly. Beatrice turned pale. "My son doesn't have autism." "The signs are quite evident, Mrs. Montgomery," the doctor insisted. "And frankly, the diet he was on is completely contraindicated for children, especially those with atypical sensory processing." Mark, feeling a mix of relief and anguish, finally verbalized it. "Our former employee suggested the same thing. She has a degree in education. She worked in inclusive education." "The same one you publicly accused of neglect?" the doctor questioned, surprising the couple. "Yes, I saw the posts. They're everywhere." Meanwhile, Teresa was facing the consequences of the defamation. In addition to the online threats, she had lost a job opportunity when the potential employer searched her name online. Her children were afraid to go to school, where they were targets of malicious comments. "We need evidence that shows the truth," explained Robert, her lawyer. "Something that contradicts Mrs. Montgomery's narrative." "The notebook," Teresa remembered. "I left my detailed observations with Mr. Montgomery, and there must be security cameras in the apartment." Robert made a note. "We'll request that evidence, and we also need to find someone who can corroborate your version." "The former employee," Teresa murmured, remembering what Mark had mentioned. "Leo had other caregivers before me. Maybe they went through similar situations." With the help of contacts from her university days, Teresa got the name and phone number of Sharon Riley, who had worked for the Montgomerys for almost a year, leaving just 3 months before Teresa was hired. "They made me sign a non-disclosure agreement," Sharon explained hesitantly when they met in a small cafe in South London. "But after what's happening to you, I can't stay silent." Sharon's stories confirmed everything. Beatrice's obsession with appearances, the inadequate diets forced upon Leo, the signs of autism that were systematically ignored. "There's more," Sharon said, lowering her voice. "I found something strange once, cleaning Beatrice's office. Letters, photos, and of a man who wasn't Mr. Montgomery. Teresa felt a chill. "You think—" "Leo looks nothing like Mr. Montgomery," Sharon's confirmed. "And the dates on the photos, they coincided with the time of the boy's conception." The two women exchanged a look of understanding. The web of lies was far more complex than they had imagined. On the third day of Leo's hospitalization, the Lister Hospital became the epicenter of a media storm. Paparazzi vied for positions at the main entrance, while the hashtag, the Leo Montgomery mystery, reached national trending topics. The story of the influencer with millions of followers and her mysteriously hospitalized son attracted curiosity and speculation. Beatrice tried to control the narrative. On her Instagram, she posted an artistic photo of her own shadow in the hospital room, with a moving caption about moments of trial that strengthen a mother's spirit. The post garnered 500,000 likes in 2 hours, and hundreds of brands sent support products to the family's address. Mark, on the other hand, was sinking into a well of guilt and regret. Sitting beside Leo's bed, he observed the specialized tests and consultations that now followed one after another. Neuropediatricians, psychologists, speech therapists, a multidisciplinary team confirmed what Teresa had identified from day one. Leo presented a clear case of autism spectrum disorder. "Your son is not sick, Mr. Montgomery," explained Dr. Raphael Newman, a neuropediatrician. "He is neurodivergent, which means his brain processes information differently. The good news is that with proper intervention, emotional support and understanding, he can develop to his full potential." As he listened intently to the medical explanations, Mark flipped through Teresa's notebook. The meticulous observations, the bibliographic references, the suggested approaches, everything indicated a deep knowledge and genuine care that contrasted dramatically with the public accusations made by Beatrice. "Doctor," Mark asked hesitantly, "the diet my wife imposed on Leo, could it have caused this state of malnutrition?" The doctor did not soften his answer. "Without a doubt, the nutritional report indicates severe deficits in proteins and carbohydrates essential for brain development. Furthermore, children on the spectrum often have specific sensory preferences for food. Forcing such a restrictive diet is frankly harmful." That night, when Beatrice returned to the apartment to get clothes, Mark confronted her with the medical report. "The diagnosis is conclusive, Beatrice. Leo is autistic, and your detox diet was slowly starving our son." "This is going to ruin everything," she murmured, ignoring the medical aspect and focusing on the implications for her career. "I have 3 campaigns. Unconscious motherhood in the works. What am I going to tell the brands?" "Is that all you care about?" Mark felt a rising anger. "Our son is in the hospital. We've discovered he's needed specialized support for years, and you're worried about advertising contracts." Beatrice adjusted the silk scarf around her neck, avoiding her husband's gaze. "You don't understand how much I've built, how much I sacrificed to get where I am. If this gets out—" "This? Our son has a name, Beatrice, and it's not this." On the other side of the city, in a small flat in Clapham, Teresa and Sharon were sharing information with Catherine Price, an investigative journalist from the portal Truth Uncovered, known for reports that unmasked the false narratives of public figures. "I have evidence that Beatrice Montgomery not only unfairly defamed Teresa, but has been systematically denying her son proper treatment for image-related reasons," Sharon explained, showing screenshots, messages and records from her time working for the family. Teresa added, "Leo shows clear signs of autism. It's not a disease, it's a neurological condition that requires understanding and adaptations. The extremely restrictive diet she imposed was incompatible with his sensory needs." Catherine, a 40-year-old woman with sharp eyes that had already unraveled many scandals, took notes methodically. "And what about the paternity issue you mentioned on the phone?" Sharon hesitated before handing over an envelope. "I photographed these letters when I worked there. I'm not proud of it, but I knew something was wrong." The letters, handwritten on letterhead paper, were signed by an Andrew Mitchell, a TV producer with whom Beatrice had worked before her marriage to Mark. The dates and intimate content left no doubt. The relationship had continued secretly after the wedding, precisely around the time of Leo's conception. "We need to find this Andrew," Catherine concluded. And we need a lawyer specializing in child and adolescent law. This goes beyond defamation. We're talking about potentially criminal negligence. As the investigation progressed, Mark made a decision that would change everything. After another argument with Beatrice, where she refused to admit any responsibility for Leo's condition, he approached the hospital's legal department. "I want to request a DNA test," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I have reason to believe I am not the boy's biological father." On the third day of the investigation, Catherine managed to locate Andrew Mitchell. Initially reluctant, he agreed to meet her when he learned of Leo's hospitalization. "Beatrice contacted me a few weeks ago," Andrew revealed, in a discreet cafe near Regent Street. "She was panicking because the boy was showing signs she could no longer hide or explain. She asked me for money for an experimental treatment in Europe." "And you knew the child could be yours?" Catherine pressed. "I always suspected," he admitted, looking older than his 45 years. "But Beatrice made it clear that her perfect life with Mark was non-negotiable. The deal was that I would never interfere. Even knowing—" "Your possible son was being deprived of proper treatment?" questioned Teresa, who was also at the meeting. Andrew looked down, ashamed. "I never imagined it was so serious. Beatrice always described temporary situations, minor challenges. When I saw the photos she herself posted, Leo looked healthy, happy." "Filters," explained Sharon. "Carefully chosen angles, perfect lighting. The reality inside that house was very different." The DNA test confirmed Mark's suspicions. He was not Leo's biological father. The revelation, instead of diminishing his commitment to the boy, seemed to strengthen it. After years of living in the shadow of Beatrice's dominant personality, something awoke in Mark, a determination to finally do what was right. With the help of his lawyer, he initiated an emergency custody process, presenting all the medical evidence of Beatrice's negligence. In parallel, Catherine Price's report was ready for publication, waiting only for the right moment. That moment came when Beatrice, pressured by her prolonged absence from social media, decided to do a live stream to explain the situation. With her talent for manipulating emotions, she created a narrative where she was the victim of incompetent doctors, malicious employees, and even the system. Without mentioning the autism diagnosis, she vaguely described health challenges that were being politicized by envious people. The Truth Uncovered portal published the full report minutes after the live stream ended. The headline left no room for doubt: "The lie behind the filter, how an influencer put her image above her son's health." The effect was devastating. The report contained testimonies from former employees, the complete medical report, anonymized but confirming ASD and malnutrition, evidence of the defamation against Teresa, and as a final blow, the confirmation that Mark was not the biological father, a piece of information that Andrew Mitchell himself corroborated in an exclusive interview. In a matter of hours, Beatrice's digital empire began to crumble. Followers abandoned her profile by the thousands. Brands cancelled contracts. The same crowd that had attacked Teresa days earlier now turned on Beatrice. The court of public opinion, always ruthless, had a new target. At the hospital, oblivious to the media storm, Leo was showing his first consistent signs of improvement. Under the guidance of the specialized ASD team, he began to accept a balanced diet adapted to his sensitivities. He could communicate using picture cards and, on the rare occasions he smiled, it was almost always for Mark. "He's responding very well to therapy," the speech therapist explained. "Autistic children often flourish when their specific needs are understood and met." Mark, who now slept at the hospital beside the boy, asked what many parents in this situation wonder. Will he ever speak normally? Have an independent life? The specialist smiled gently. "The spectrum is broad, Mr. Montgomery. Some autistic individuals develop full verbal language, others communicate in different ways. The important thing is that Leo now has the support he needs to reach his potential, whatever that may be, and judging by the bond you two are forming, he has every chance to thrive." That night, as Leo slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Mark received an unexpected phone call. It was Teresa. "I wanted to know how he is," she said, her voice revealing the genuine affection she felt for the boy. "Getting better," Mark replied. "The doctors say he's a fighter. Teresa, I wanted to thank you, and to apologize for everything that happened. It wasn't your fault. It was, partly. I saw what was happening and did nothing. For years I let Beatrice run everything, even when I sensed something was wrong." On the other end of the line, Teresa hesitated. "What's going to happen now with the report?" "The truth is out," Mark said, with a serenity that surprised even himself. "And as painful as it is, it was necessary. Leo deserves a real chance at the life he should have always had." What neither of them knew at that moment was that this conversation would be just the beginning of a collaboration that would transform not only Leo's life, but the lives of many other children and families. 2 weeks after the report was published, the landscape had changed dramatically for everyone involved. The Beatrice Montgomery case had become a national debate on the limits of child exposure on social media, the toxic culture of influencers, and the dangers of misinformation about conditions like autism. On the morning of the hearing that would decide Leo's temporary custody, the Central Family Court in Holborn was surrounded by journalists. Mark arrived early, accompanied by his lawyer, Dr. Helen Carter, a family law specialist. Minutes later, a van with tinted windows pulled up, revealing Beatrice, unrecognizable to those who only knew her from social media. Without filters, without elaborate styling, she seemed smaller and more fragile, though her gaze retained the same calculating intensity. "I'm ready to fight for my son," she declared for the cameras, in a performance that mixed vulnerability with determination. Andrew Mitchell, the newly discovered biological father, also attended, keeping a discreet distance from the press. After the initial shock of the public revelation, he had sought psychological counseling to deal with the situation and was beginning to seriously consider his role in the life of the son he never knew. Inside the courtroom, Judge Paul Miller carefully reviewed the medical reports, psychological evaluations, and all the evidence presented by both parties. "This court is here to determine the best interests of the child, Leo Montgomery, age 4, the magistrate began. "The medical reports confirm a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, aggravated by a state of malnutrition due to inadequate dietary restrictions." Beatrice, impeccably dressed in a discreet suit that replaced her usual flashy outfits, interrupted. "Your Honor, these restrictions were recommended by specialists. I always followed medical advice for Leo's well-being." "Could you identify these specialists, Mrs. Montgomery?" the judge asked. Beatrice's silence was eloquent. Her lawyer intervened, trying to shift the focus to the smear campaign his client was allegedly suffering. Dr. Carter then presented the most compelling evidence: Teresa's notebook with detailed observations, testimonies from former employees, and most importantly, Leo's previous medical records showing symptoms that had been systematically ignored. "Your Honor, Mr. Mark Montgomery is not the child's biological father, as proven by the DNA test. However, he has been the present parental figure since birth and demonstrates a genuine commitment to Leo's well-being," the lawyer argued. Furthermore, it was he who sought a proper diagnosis and specialized treatment when the truth came to light. Andrew Mitchell, called to testify, surprised everyone. "I have no intention of contesting custody at this time. I recognize that Leo needs stability. Mr. Montgomery has been his father for 4 years while I failed to take responsibility. I want to get to know my son, build a relationship, but I understand this must happen gradually and always prioritizing his well-being." The psychological evaluation was decisive. The experts described how Leo showed signs of post-traumatic stress when exposed to elements that reminded him of Beatrice's controlled environment. Cameras, bright lights, even certain songs that played constantly during her recordings. "The child demonstrates severe anxiety in the mother's presence," the forensic psychologist explained. "Conversely, he shows significant progress when with Mr. Montgomery, who has been rigorously following all the recommendations of the multidisciplinary team." After hours of testimonies and analysis, the judge announced his decision. Temporary custody would be granted to Mark, with supervised visits for Beatrice, conditional on her starting specialized therapy, Andrew would be granted monitored visitation rights to be gradually expanded according to Leo's adjustment. This court recognizes that Mr. Montgomery, despite not being the biological father, has built essential emotional bonds for Leo's development. As for Mrs. Montgomery, the reports indicate worrying patterns of neglect driven by public image interests, which must be addressed before she can assume adequate parental responsibilities. Beatrice left the courthouse through a back door, avoiding the reporters. Her fall in the digital world had been vertiginous, from beloved influencer to a symbol of parental toxicity in a matter of days. Brands that once vied for her image now issued statements distancing themselves from any association. For Teresa, the vindication came as a relief mixed with a deep sadness for Leo's unnecessary suffering. After the court's decision, she received a surprising proposal from Mark to take on an official role as a consultant in Leo's care, using her experience in inclusive education to facilitate his transition and treatment. "I can't promise a salary like what you'd get in formal education," Mark explained in a cafe near the court, "but I can guarantee it will be fair. More importantly, Leo trusts you, and so do I." Teresa hesitated, thinking of her own children who had suffered the consequences of the defamation. "I need to protect my family too, Mark." "I understand completely," he replied. "That's why, in addition to the job offer, my lawyers have prepared a lawsuit against Beatrice for defamation and emotional distress. You deserve compensation for what you went through." The following week, as Teresa and Mark worked together to create an environment suited to Leo's sensory needs in the apartment, now free of Beatrice's obsession with aesthetic perfection, an idea began to take shape. "You know, there are so many families facing similar challenges," Teresa commented, watching Leo interact positively with sensory materials recommended by the occupational therapist. "Parents who don't understand autism, children diagnosed late, professionals without adequate training, and single mothers like you, juggling to care for their children while trying to survive financially," added Mark, who was beginning to see the world beyond the privileged bubble he had always lived in. The seed of what would become the Neurodiversity Institute was planted. Using his own resources and the compensation Beatrice was ordered to pay Teresa in the defamation lawsuit, Mark acquired a space in Shoreditch. The vision was to create a center offering integrated support, specialized assessment for neurodivergent children, guidance for families, professional training, and a specific support program for single mothers. "We want to turn pain into purpose," Mark explained to the press during the launch event 2 months later. Beside him, Teresa, now the Institute's educational director, added, "Our mission is to build bridges where there were once only chasms of misunderstanding." Sharon, the former employee who had helped expose the truth, joined the team as an administrative coordinator. Andrew Mitchell, seeking to atone for years of absence, offered his expertise in audiovisual production to create educational content about neurodiversity. Leo, oblivious to the adult complexities around him, was slowly flourishing under proper care. Every word he managed to articulate, every successful interaction with other children in his therapy group was celebrated as the victory it truly was. His world, once confined within walls of impossible expectations, was expanding at a pace he could process. Meanwhile, Beatrice began her own painful process of acknowledgement. The therapy sessions, initially seen as a mere judicial obligation, started to break through layers of defenses built up over years. "I really believed I was protecting him," she confessed to her therapist, Dr. Ronald, after weeks of resistance. "My parents always taught me that appearance was everything. I grew up hearing that no one could know our weaknesses, our differences." "And when did you realize Leo was different?" the psychologist asked gently. Beatrice looked at her own hands, the expensive rings and perfectly manicured, nails she once flaunted in close-ups for millions of followers. "From early on, he didn't react like my friends' children. He didn't make eye contact, didn't always respond to his name. But admitting that would have been like admitting a failure on my part. Being different is not being flawed, Beatrice. I know that now," she whispered, tears finally breaking through the barrier of self-protection. "But I lost years, precious years, and I hurt so many people in the process. The path to redemption would be long, The supervised visits with Leo were still tense and artificial. The boy, now, more expressive in his emotions, showed anxiety in Beatrice's presence. Cameras and phones were forbidden at these meetings, a restriction that initially seemed unbearable for someone who had documented every aspect of her life for external approval. During one of these visits, Beatrice brought a gift, not something expensive or flashy like before, but a weighted sensory blanket recommended by Leo's occupational therapist. "I researched it," she explained shyly to Mark, who was supervising the visit. "I read that it helps with anxiety, with sensory regulation." It was a small but significant step. For the first time, Beatrice showed an interest in understanding the world from her son's point of view, not through the filter of her own idealized image. Meanwhile, the Neurodiversity Institute grew rapidly, serving more families than Mark and Teresa had initially imagined. The demand exposed a disturbing reality. How many children were being misunderstood, mislabeled, or simply ignored in their neurological differences? "We need to expand," Mark concluded during a team meeting. "There are entire communities without access to diagnosis, schools without support for true inclusion, and families torn apart by a lack of knowledge," Teresa added, "like what almost happened with Leo." The mention of the boy's name brought a moment of silent reflection to the room. In just a few months, so many lives had been transformed, some destroyed, others rebuilt, all irrevocably altered by events that began with a simple plate of food served with love. A year had passed since the hearing that changed the course of so many lives. The Neurodiversity Institute had become a benchmark in London, with a waiting list that grew each week. What had started as a project of personal redemption had turned into a quiet revolution in how families dealt with autism and other neurological conditions. On a sunny, Sunday afternoon, the Institute was decorated with blue and yellow balloons, Leo's favorite colors, tables with varied food textures, strategically placed sensory spaces, and carefully controlled music volume. Every detail was planned so that all children, regardless of their sensory particularities, could comfortably participate in the celebration. "5 years old," murmured Mark, watching his son interact with other children in a cushioned corner of the room. "I can hardly believe it." Beside him, Teresa smiled. In a year of intense work, her relationship with Mark had evolved from a professional partnership into something deeper. Both, marked by painful experiences, found in each other not just understanding, but the possibility of a new beginning. "He's made so much progress," she commented. "Remember when he could barely tolerate another person's touch? Now look." Leo, wearing noise-reducing headphones, one of the adaptations he had learned to request when needed, was showing another boy how to build a circuit with magnetic tiles. His words were few, but precise. His smile, once rare, now appeared spontaneously. "This is the first birthday he actually seems to be enjoying," commented Andrew, who approached with a gift carefully wrapped in paper without shine or rough textures. The relationship between Mark and Andrew had evolved from initial discomfort to mutual respect. Both put Leo's well-being above any bruised ego or rivalry. Andrew, now the Institute's communications director, had spent the last year using his media experience to educate other families about neurodiversity. "Where's Louisa?" Mark asked, looking for Teresa's teenage daughter. "Helping at the sensory workshop with the younger kids," Teresa replied proudly. "She's discovered a calling working here. She's thinking of studying occupational therapy after she finishes school." Matthew, Teresa's older son, had found his first formal job at the Institute, managing the website and educational social media. The family, which a year ago had faced threats and defamation, was now integrated into a project bigger than themselves. In the center of the hall, Sharon coordinated the support team, single mothers who, after going through the Institute's program, returned as volunteers or paid professionals. "The special cake arrives in 10 minutes, she informed Mark. "Adapted recipe, gluten-free and no artificial colors, but tested and approved by the birthday boy himself." The atmosphere was one of genuine celebration, not just of Leo's birthday, but of the small and large achievements of all the children present. Some could communicate with words, others used tablets. with alternative communication systems. Some avoided contact, others sought specific sensory stimuli. All were accepted and welcomed exactly as they were. "There's someone here to see Leo," Matthew announced, approaching the group with a mixed expression. "It's Beatrice." The mention of her name created a moment of tension. Beatrice had kept her distance in recent months, attending only the court-ordered visits, which had gradually become less supervised as she progressed in her psychological treatment. Mark exchanged a look with Teresa, before replying, "She was invited. She's his mother, after all." At the entrance to the hall, Beatrice waited nervously. Anyone, seeing her now, would hardly recognize the influencer who commanded trends and dictated standards of perfection. Her hair, once meticulously dyed and styled, showed natural streaks. Her face, without elaborate makeup, revealed dark circles and a few expression lines that would have been unthinkable in her photos before. "I wasn't sure I'd be welcome," she confessed when Mark approached. "I brought him something." In her hands was a carefully bound, handmade album. Mark led her to a quieter corner, where Leo was playing alone with his magnetic blocks, his favorite toy since forever, now finally recognized as an important part of his self-regulation. "Leo," Mark called softly, "look who's come to see you." The boy briefly looked up, recognizing his mother. He showed no enthusiasm, but no anxiety either, a significant improvement compared to previous months when the mere mention of Beatrice made him agitated. "Hi, Leo," she said, sitting on the floor at a respectful distance. "Happy birthday." To everyone's surprise, Leo replied, "Thank you, Mom." They were just 3 words, but they represented months of speech therapy, behavioral intervention, and most importantly, emotional security. Beatrice fought back tears, not the performative tears of her old live streams, but a genuine emotion that needed no audience or approval. "I brought you a present. It's a book with photos of you since you were a baby." Carefully, she opened the album. Unlike the perfectly produced images she used to share online, these were simple photos, many of them never published. Leo sleeping, Leo playing with water in the garden, Leo exploring different textures. "I was there," she said, more to herself than to her son. "Even when I wasn't really present, I was there." Leo flipped through the album with interest, recognizing himself in the images. When he came to a photo where he was about 2 years old, flapping his hands, a typical self-regulatory behavior in autism, he pointed and said, "Happy." Beatrice looked at Mark, confused. He explained, "He's learning to identify emotions in expressions and behaviors. When he flaps his hands like that, it's usually because he's happy or excited about something. I always thought it was a problem to be fixed," Beatrice admitted, her voice choked. "I never realized it could be happiness." The party continued around them, respecting the space the 3 of them needed in that moment. Teresa watched from a distance, aware of how significant that encounter was. "It's hard for her," commented Andrew, who joined Teresa in her observation, "letting go not only of custody, but of the entire narrative she built for herself." "For all of us," Teresa replied. "We've had to unlearn so much of what we thought we knew about perfection, about success, about what really matters." In the center of the hall, Sharon announced the arrival of the cake, a creation from the inclusive bakery the Institute had helped establish, employing neurodivergent young adults. The candle moment was carefully planned. No loud traditional singing, just a soft, happy birthday, respecting the sensory limits of Leo and the other children present. When everyone gathered, Mark made a brief speech. "A year ago we were in crisis. Today we celebrate not only Leo's birthday, but a new understanding of what it truly means to welcome differences. This institute was born from pain, but it has grown with love and purpose." Teresa added, "Every child we serve teaches us something new. Every family we welcome expands our understanding. We aren't just offering therapies or support. We're building a community where being different doesn't mean being less." The Institute now regularly served over 100 families with specific programs for different needs: early intervention for infants with signs of autism, a support group for parents, vocational training for young people on the spectrum, and Teresa's special project, a support network for single mothers of neurodivergent children. After the cake, as the party began to wind down, Beatrice sought out Teresa. It was the first time they had spoken directly since the scandal. "I wanted to thank you," Beatrice said, visibly uncomfortable. "You saw what I couldn't see. You saved my son." Teresa hesitated, the memories of the online mobbing still fresh. "I did what anyone with knowledge about autism would do." "No, you did more. You risked everything, and I destroyed your reputation, threatened your livelihood, exposed your children." "Why are you telling me this now?" Teresa asked. Beatrice took a deep breath. "Because part of my therapy is taking responsibility for the consequences of my actions, and because I'm trying to rebuild my life with authenticity." She explained that she had completely abandoned social media as an influencer. She was studying to become an educational psychologist, working part-time at an inclusive school in an underserved area. "I don't expect forgiveness," she concluded. "I just wanted you to know that I understand the magnitude of what I did, and that in some way I'm trying to give back to the world in a more honest way." Teresa didn't offer immediate absolution. Some wounds need time to fully heal. But she offered something equally valuable: acknowledgement of the effort. "It's a long journey," she said simply, "for all of us." Before leaving, Beatrice left one last gift for the Institute, not money or material goods, but something more significant: a documentary she had produced over several months, interviewing former influencers who had left the digital life to reconnect with themselves and their families. "It's called Beyond the Filters," she explained, "so that other people don't make the same mistakes I did." At the end of that day, when the hall was almost empty, Leo surprised everyone with an unexpected gesture. He approached Teresa and handed her one of his precious magnetic blocks, a rare and meaningful act of sharing for an autistic child. "For you," he said, his diction still labored but perfectly understandable. Teresa accepted the gift, understanding its symbolic value. "Thank you, Leo. I'll treasure it." Mark, watching the scene, felt a wave of emotion. In 1 year, so many transformations, some painful, others liberating, all necessary. That night, after Leo had fallen asleep in his room adapted with soft lights and no excessive stimuli, Mark and Teresa sat on the apartment's balcony. The view of Hyde Park, which once served only as a backdrop for perfect photos, was now simply appreciated for what it was: a moment of peace in the urban chaos. "Do you think we're on the right path?" he asked, holding Teresa's hand. "With the Institute? With Leo? Or with us?" She smiled. "With everything," he replied. "Sometimes it feels like it all happened for a greater reason. That all the pain had a purpose." Teresa reflected for a moment. "I don't believe suffering is necessary for us to grow, but I do believe we can choose to transform it into something meaningful. That's what we did." The future still held challenges. Leo would face many obstacles in a world not always prepared for neurodiversity. The Institute would need constant resources to expand its reach. The complex relationships between Mark, Beatrice, and Andrew would continue to evolve, always orbiting around the well-being of the child who united them. But at that moment, there was a shared certainty. The truth, however, painful at first, had paved the way for a reality far more authentic than any perfectly filtered image could ever offer. And for Leo, the child who had once withered in silence, the world was finally beginning to make sense. Not because he had changed to fit into it, but because those who loved him had learned to create an environment where his unique way of being was not just tolerated, but celebrated. At the end of that afternoon, with the Institute empty and the party over, Leo walked through the corridors still decorated with colorful ribbons. He stopped in front of each drawing taped to the wall, curiously touching the textures of different papers. Beside him, Mark watched from a distance, as he had learned to do, giving space, yet remaining present. "Dad," Leo said suddenly, turning with one of the drawings in his hand. Mark froze. It was the first time he had heard the word come from the boy's mouth. You called me Dad?" he asked, crouching down to his son's level. Leo nodded, offering the drawing, a colourful scribble of chaotic lines but with 3 circular figures in the centre. Me, you, T. Mark felt tears threatening to fall, but he smiled. Is that our portrait? Leo smiled back, and this time it wasn't just a reflex, it was a conscious gesture. Mark hugged him carefully, respecting the sensory boundaries he now knew so well. Leo didn't pull away. At that exact moment, Teresa entered the hallway and stopped when she saw them. She remained silent, respecting the scene, but Leo waved to her with an energetic motion, as if to say, "You come too." She approached slowly, sat beside them on the floor. Leo handed the drawing to her, pointing to the figure he had drawn with longer hair. T. "Is that me?" she asked, surprised. Leo smiled again. After so much silence, it was as if he were now discovering new ways to express himself, through words, drawings, gestures. "Should we put this drawing in the Institute's main room?" Mark suggested. "That way everyone can see the family we've built." Leo nodded. Teresa held the paper gently. "It's more than a drawing. It's his world organizing itself on the inside, a piece of language that was once locked away." The next day, Mark hung the drawing at the entrance of the Institute in a simple light wood frame. Above it he had a small plaque printed that read, "When the world learns to listen, children find their voice." Leo, age 5. This simple act had unexpected repercussions. Visitors to the Institute began to photograph the drawing, sharing the message. Soon, educators, therapists, and parents were using the phrase as inspiration on social media, in pamphlets, and in presentations. Little Leo, without knowing it, had become a symbol of a new way of seeing autism, not as something to be fixed, but as a difference to be understood. And in that institute born of pain, silence, and courage, something even greater was now sprouting, a culture of listening. In the end, it wasn't perfection that saved Leo. It wasn't the filters, the million-pound contracts, or the promises of success packaged in ready-made speeches. It was the attentive gaze of someone who refused to see only the surface. It was the silent listening, the respect for another's timing, the simple gesture of a plate of food made with affection. Leo didn't need to be fixed. It was the world around him that needed to learn to see with different eyes. And when that happened, not only did he flourish, but so did everyone who dared to walk beside him. Because true transformation is not born from the noise of the crowd, but from the silence of real connections. And perhaps, in the end, the most powerful revolution we can make is to love someone exactly as they are. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Leo and his family has deeply touched your hearts. Every challenge, every discovery, and every transformation we followed reminds us that, behind perfect appearances, there are truths that need to be respected. If this narrative about autism, real motherhood, and the search for authenticity has stirred something in you, we have a special playlist with other stories that explore the complexities of family relationships. Find it by clicking here on the side. To continue following stories that make us reflect on the masks we wear and the truths we hide, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Every day, we bring you narratives that go beyond the filters and reveal what truly matters in life. We look forward to hearing from you in the comments. Which moment in this story touched your heart the most?